16 most unbelievable moments on Johnny Carson. Number 8 will leave you stunned for 3 decades. Johnny Carson welcomed America into their homes, 5 nights a week as the face of The Tonight Show. He carried himself with an image of smooth professionalism, the calm king of late night, who seemed ready for anything with his sharp humor and natural charm. But even Johnny Carson, the most composed figure on television, could be caught off guard by the wild and unpredictable things that sometimes happen when a show is live. Johnny always wanted to be ready for every situation, said a former Tonight Show producer who spent more than 10 years by his side. Yet there were nights when even he could not keep that legendary Carson control moments, when he completely lost it in front of millions. Tonight, we are looking back at the 16 wildest, unplanned, and unforgettable times from Carson's 30 years as host. The times when the man who was usually in full command suddenly had to surrender to his guests. His feelings, or just strange twists that nobody could have seen coming. And the event that landed at number 8 created more audience response than almost any other in the programs. History shocking many while thrilling others with Carson's unexpected honesty. But before we reach that, let us revisit the tomahawk throw that sparked maybe the most famous laughing fit the medium has ever seen, a moment so perfectly timed and visually absurd that no script could have created it if anyone tried. Number 16, Ed Ames' Tomahawk Disaster. It all started as a simple segment. Ed Ames, who was then playing Mingo on the hit NBC adventure show, Daniel Boone, appeared on The Tonight Show in April 1965 to display the skill of throwing a tomahawk, a move his frontier character often used on screen. At first, everything seemed normal. Ames explained how to hold and release, while Carson watched with interest. Then, a wooden cutout shaped like a cowboy was brought on stage, as the target Ames got ready to throw. What happened next would go down in history. Ames sent the tomahawk flying straight into the cutout's crotch. The crowd instantly exploded with laughter, but it was Carson's reaction that turned a funny mistake into one of television's most unforgettable scenes. Johnny could not control himself, said a director who sat in the control booth that evening. We had seen him laugh many times before, but never with that much intensity. He doubled over his body, shaking with tears in his eyes, unable to form words for what seemed like forever. Carson's laughing fit kept going for nearly 3 minutes, which in television terms felt like an eternity. When he finally managed to recover, he delivered a line at just the right moment. But that's indefinite. All right. I never even knew you were Jewish. His words triggered another explosion of laughter from the audience and proved Carson's unmatched instinct to find the perfect punchline, even in total chaos. What made this night so rare was that it showed Johnny without the polished act. His professional mask was gone, as he let himself completely surrender to the humor of the accident. That is what made people adore him, said a former NBC executive at a time when celebrities carefully controlled their image. Viewers saw Johnny lose it in the most real way possible. The tomahawk throw became so legendary that it was replayed again and again for decades, and it even aired once more during Carson's final week in 1992. Proving its place as maybe the most perfectly spontaneous moment ever captured on The Tonight Show.
Carson's cigarette box! Oh, I broke his box! I broke Carson's cigarette box!
Number 15. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box. Johnny Carson was famous for being very particular about the look of his set. Every item on his desk had a place, and one of the items he valued most was a wooden cigarette box that held personal meaning for him. So when Don Rickles filled in as guest host of The Tonight Show in October 1973 and ended up breaking that cigarette box, he instantly knew he was in serious trouble. The following night, when Carson returned, he spoke on air about the broken box. He showed the audience the damage, and with a grin, promised he would find a way to get back at Rickles. But nobody, not even Rickles himself, could have guessed how that payback would unfold months later. Carson discovered that Rickles was shooting his sitcom CPO Sharky on another NBC soundstage nearby. In a bold move, Carson decided to crash the filming with cameras following him to confront Rickles about what had happened with the cigarette box that was totally off the cuff. Explained a Tonight Show producer who witnessed it. Johnny just glanced at us during a commercial break and asked, "Isn't Rickles taping today?" Let's head over. The crew grabbed some gear and literally sprinted across the studio lot. What came next turned into one of the most unexpected and hilarious moments of Carson's entire career. He charged onto the CPO Sharky set while a live scene was being filmed, leaving the sitcom audience completely puzzled. Rickles, dressed in his Navy costume, looked genuinely stunned. As Carson burst in, "They told me you broke my box on the show last night." Carson shouted. Rickles stammered, I did not mean to. I will fix it. Somehow, I promise. Please just let me stay on your show. You mean so much to me." Carson cut him off. "Please do not humble yourself. I want you to stay with me, but do not humble yourself." Rickles protested. "I was in the middle of a scene." Carson fired back. "I do not care about your scene. You broke my cigarette box." What made this unforgettable was not just the unexpected ambush, but also how clearly it showed the warmth between the two friends beneath the act. Carson's mock anger was full of affection, and Rickles was delighted by the surprise Johnny would never have pulled that with anyone else. Said a director who worked with both men, it proved how much he cared for Rickles and how comfortable they were together. Carson usually kept a tight hold on his show, but with Don, he was even willing to turn himself into the punchline. The bit instantly became a classic, replayed again and again, and remembered as one of the rare times when Johnny abandoned the script and let pure spontaneity rule the stage.
I can't believe it! The last guest, the last fool, Mr. Carson, will have to suffer gladly. You are the wind beneath my wings.
Number 14. Bette Midler makes Carson cry. As the legendary 30-year journey of Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show reached its closing chapters in May 1992, the last few episodes grew more and more emotional. The second-to-last program, with Robin Williams and Bette Midler, promised laughs and lively moments. But no one could have expected the powerful and tender exchange that became one of the defining goodbyes of Carson's career. Near the end of the show, Midler, who had spent her appearance trading jokes and playful banter with Johnny, suddenly shifted her tone and told the audience she wanted to perform something truly special for the man who was stepping away from late night. She began to sing a soft, heartfelt version of One for My Baby and One More for the Road, the timeless tune by Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer that speaks of final calls and last farewells. As she sang directly to Carson, the cameras captured a striking image. Johnny Carson, the host known for decades as the most composed man on television, sitting with his eyes glistening, overcome by emotion. The entire room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop, remembered a sound engineer on duty that night. Every single person in the studio, the staff, the audience, all understood that we were witnessing an incredibly private moment that Johnny was choosing to share with millions. Johnny was not simply tearing up at a performance. He was letting go of 3 decades of his life. For a man who had built his career on never letting the public see too deeply inside, this was unprecedented throughout his long run. Carson had always kept a slight wall between himself and the viewers, always charming, always witty, yet never fully revealing his inner self. But in this moment, that wall completely disappeared. He did not hide behind humor or try to lighten the atmosphere. Explained a director who helped stage the final week. He gave himself permission to simply be human with Bette and with his audience. And that is what made it so powerful. When the song ended, Johnny leaned forward and kissed Bette's hand, an act of pure appreciation that carried more weight than any words. He then turned to the camera and admitted, "I can't top," that it became known as one of the most genuine moments ever broadcast, a rare time when Johnny Carson let the world see his true heart as he faced the end of an extraordinary era.
He's just getting comfortable.
Well, I can't sit here the rest. I can't sit and talk to people with an animal on my head.
Number 13, Animal Handlers, Monkey climbs Carson's head during his long run on The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson often invited animal experts to bring exotic creatures onto the stage, and these visits were always full of surprises, but none became more unforgettable than a 1979 appearance with handler Joanne Steele and her capuchin monkey. The segment started off in a standard way with Steele talking about the animal's habits, while Johnny listened politely. Then, out of nowhere, the little monkey decided that Carson's neatly styled hair would make the perfect playground. It suddenly leapt straight onto his head. A camera operator who was there that night remembered there was no signal and no hint. It just happened one moment. The monkey was calm, and the next, it was climbing all over Johnny's famous hair. What turned this into a legendary bit was not the monkey's behavior alone, but the way Carson responded. Instead of yelling or asking for help, he froze in place with a look of mild acceptance, while the animal tore apart his carefully arranged style. Johnny's hair was considered sacred. It was always flawless, without a single strand out of line, said a makeup artist from the program, to watch it get wrecked by a monkey. While he sat there with that blank, straight-faced look, was absolute comedy gold. When the monkey finally hopped back to its handler, Johnny turned to the audience, with his hair pointing in every direction, and delivered a calm line. "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The crowd exploded in laughter. What made it even more special was how the moment revealed Carson's greatest gift as a host, his ability to roll with chaos and find humor in total accidents without ever letting himself seem rattled. That was Johnny at his finest, said a longtime producer. He understood the audience was not mocking him. They were sharing the absurdity with him, and he loved being in on the joke as long as it made people laugh. The monkey clip went on to be one of the most requested pieces in The Tonight Show archive, a shining example of how Carson could keep his dignity while laughing through the most ridiculous situations.
Particular interest of mine, and I'm very proud to present this gentleman's amazing illusions. Would you welcome the great Flydini?
Number 12. Steve Martin's most absurd magic routine. When Steve Martin appeared on The Tonight Show in 1980, he was already making a name for himself as a groundbreaking comic, pushing a new style of anti-comedy humor that thrived on awkward pauses, deliberate nonsense, and wild absurdity. For this visit, Martin announced that he was going to perform a magic trick, so Carson stepped aside and gave him the floor. What followed was one of the most bizarre and hilarious acts The Tonight Show had ever seen. Martin's routine, called the Great Fly. Danny had him pretend to unzip his pants and start pulling random items from his fly. He produced eggs, a salt shaker, a ringing telephone, and finally a tiny hand that waved at the crowd. The joy of that routine was seeing how Johnny reacted. Recalled a staff writer who was there that night. At first, Johnny tried to keep his role as the straight man, but as the act grew stranger and more ridiculous, You could see him cracking up in real time. This was not stage laughter. He was honestly blindsided by Martin's dedication to the bit. By the end, Johnny was bent over holding himself together, while Martin never broke character, delivering every gag with perfect deadpan seriousness. What made it unforgettable was how obvious it was that Johnny was having fun being surprised by comedy. In its purest form, Johnny loved moments when he could be entertained, explained a longtime producer who worked with both men. Over the decades, he saw thousands of comics. Very few managed to surprise him. Steve was one of those rare ones who could turn Johnny into a regular viewer again, someone who had no clue what was coming. The fly routine is now remembered as a textbook example of Martin's trailblazing style, tearing up conventions, leaning into absurdity, and mining laughs from the deliberately uncomfortable for Carson. It was a chance to drop his role as host and simply enjoy the ride. Even after the cameras cut, Johnny was still laughing, said the producer. He leaned over and told me that is exactly the kind of thing that makes this whole job worthwhile. High praise from a man who had seen just about everything.
Believe that comedy can heal you. Praise the power.
Praise the Jesus.
And Sears had a sale, this furniture went cheap.
Number 11, Robin Williams goes rogue when Robin Williams visited The Tonight Show. The typical structure of late-night interviews often dissolved into complete, unpredictable chaos. Williams carried a manic energy and lightning-fast improvisational style that simply could not be contained within the usual rhythm of Carson's program. Johnny once described Robin as like trying to catch lightning in a bottle while it is already running away, remembered a Tonight Show writer who was present for several of those appearances, while most guests followed Johnny's lead. Robin was one of the rare ones who actually made Johnny follow his one particularly unforgettable visit. Happened in the early 1980s, when Robin was technically there to promote a new movie. Within moments of sitting down, he was firing off rapid impressions, leaping from the guest chair to act out a physical bit, and even turning Carson's desk into his personal stage for what looked like a totally spontaneous show. The control room would go into near panic, said a director who helped oversee multiple Williams segments. They were asking, "Where is he headed? Should we cut to commercial?" But Johnny would just wave them away. He knew that with Robin, the only option was to let it happen and savor the ride. What made these moments magical was seeing Carson, the master of control, happily hand over the reins to Robin's whirlwind brilliance. Instead of dragging the talk back to scripted questions, Johnny would sit back sometimes, wiping away tears of laughter, choosing to be part of the audience rather than play the role of strict host. Johnny loved the way Robin kept him guessing, said a longtime producer after conducting thousands of interviews that often followed predictable patterns. He found Robin's unpredictability refreshing. Johnny once told me, "I never know what will happen when Robin sits down, and that is the best compliment I can give." A guest Robin's Tonight Show spots became so famous that Johnny began warning audiences before he walked out, preparing them for the wild ride ahead. It was one of the few times Carson admitted that his typical format simply might not hold up proof of how much he respected the unique brilliance Robin brought every time.
Marco Mangananzo was hurt.
Marco Mangananzo.
Trombino Bombazzo. 2 bullets in the head Thursday.
Number 10. Don Rickles roasts Frank Sinatra. When Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, he came with the aura of untouchable fame that made him a legend, and that also made many comedians too cautious to ever joke at his expense. Sinatra's connections and fiery temperament were well known in Hollywood, so few dared to risk upsetting him. But Don Rickles was not like most performers, with Sinatra sitting beside him on Carson's couch. Rickles launched into one of his classic roasts and spoke to the chairman of the board with the same playful disrespect he would show to any audience member at a nightclub. "Look at him as the big star." Rickles said, pointing at Sinatra, "He shows up and everyone thinks he's so wonderful." Well, let me tell you, this man is overrated. As the jokes kept coming, the camera focused on Carson, his face caught between nervous laughter and real worry over how Sinatra might react. Johnny was genuinely uneasy, confirmed a producer who worked on that episode. Carson had seen Sinatra's temper more than once, and knew he was not always quick to laugh at being mocked. The studio was full of tension. Would Sinatra laugh along, or would he be insulted? The turning point arrived when Rickles placed a hand on Sinatra's knee and said, "Frank, you know, I'm only kidding. I love you. Can I get a ride home?" The audience erupted with relief when Sinatra broke into loud laughter, clearly enjoying that Rickles dared to treat him like everyone else, instead of showing fear because of his legendary status that took real courage. Carson later admitted, Don always knew how far to go, but that night there was still real danger, since very few people could tease Sinatra that way and walk away unscathed. The magic of that moment was more than just humor. It carried cultural weight. It showed a rare side of Sinatra, who usually kept tight control over his public image. Here, he allowed himself to be roasted without anger or consequence for Carson. It was the perfect example of what made The Tonight Show so unique. Anything could happen. And when strong personalities collided, it created moments of unforgettable live television that nobody could script.
Have you always been rather zoftic? What would they call that where you grew up in Tennessee?
I can't say.
Healthy?
Healthy, I guess.
Yeah.
Bosomy.
Bosomy?
Yeah, I guess that'd be what they'd say. But
Number 9, Dolly Parton, and the infamous comment when Dolly Parton appeared on The Tonight Show in 1977. She was already well known for her powerful singing talent, and also for her curvy figure, which often became the subject of light-hearted jokes that she herself handled with humor during their chat. Carson and Parton shared playful banter, the kind of back and forth that defined many Tonight Show interviews, but then came a remark that would go down as one of the most talked-about moments in the history of the show, looking at her low-cut outfit. Carson said, "I'd give a year of my life to peek under that blouse." The audience gasped and laughed at the same time, while Parton, ever the professional, handled it with grace, laughing it off. But the words were already out there. Live on television, the tension in the control room was real, remembered a director who was present at the time. He said everyone was holding their breath, wondering how it would play out in that era. Comments like that were often brushed off as acceptable, but even then it felt bold and very direct for Johnny, who normally kept a more gentlemanlike approach. The reaction outside the studio was huge. The network received more letters from viewers about that one comment than almost anything else in the show's long run. Some viewers loved the honesty, thinking Carson simply said what many were quietly thinking. Others said it was inappropriate and not respectful, even though Dolly herself brushed it off. Johnny never addressed it openly on the show, but according to a former NBC executive, he admitted privately that he had crossed a line. What stood out was that Dolly herself never claimed to be offended, and later said she actually took the comment as a compliment. Still, the incident showed how television and culture were starting to change. What once might have slipped by unnoticed was now being judged with closer scrutiny, a shift that would only grow stronger in the years ahead for Carson, a man known for knowing exactly where the line was. It was a rare mistake. His usually sharp instinct failed him that night. A television historian later remarked that such a line would never make it to air today, but that moment froze a specific point in time when television was testing its limits on honesty and respect. The incident remains one of the most remembered moments from Carson's 30-year run, and still sparks conversation about gender celebrity and the evolving standards of public behavior.
Let me ask you something. What was the guy's name in Vegas?
Hu Gao.
Hu Gao.
Yeah.
He's got a better job than you. He only works 2 hours a week.
Number 8. Bob Hope bombs, and Carson is over it. Bob Hope was once one of America's most loved entertainers, a comedy icon whose career covered vaudeville radio, film, and television. His visits to The Tonight Show were supposed to be major highlights, and in earlier years they often were. But by the 1980s, a clear problem had started to show. Hope, now in his late 70s and early 80s, would come with dated material, often reading jokes from cards and appearing out of touch with how the audience was reacting. Johnny began to dread those visits. Admitted a writer who worked on the show in that period earlier in his career, Bob had been brilliant, but by this stage, he was mostly going through motions, repeating the same golf and political jokes he had been recycling for decades. What made these segments hard to watch was Johnny himself, a master of timing, forced to act as if the jokes were hitting when they clearly were not. Johnny never let it show on air, but backstage, after one rough appearance, he quietly said, "Hope does not listen, he just talks." It was a rare glimpse of honesty from Carson about another comedian he respected, but whose act had gone stale. The toughest of these appearances came in the mid-1980s, when Hope arrived with jokes about current events that already felt old, as he read from his cards. Ignoring the weak laughs, Johnny's face revealed the truth, a mix of forced politeness and visible strain. Johnny's smile got tighter and tighter, remembered a camera operator who was there. He loosened his tie and shot glances at Ed, the subtle signs he gave when things were dying, but he would keep going. What made it even more striking was the contrast between the legendary Hope of the past and the aging Hope who struggled. Carson, who valued the history of comedy, found himself watching a hero who could no longer connect. It felt like seeing a great athlete play past his prime, explained a producer who saw several of those later visits. Johnny, more than anyone knew, comedy changes with time. What works in one decade may not work in another, and seeing Hope struggle seemed to remind him of his own limits in the business. Still, no matter his private frustration, Johnny always showed respect to Hope in public, proving his deep sense of tradition and awareness of his own place in comedy.
And there were nights when I'd feel this stare, and I'd wake up and he'd be sitting there, and I'd reach out to stroke his hair, and sometimes I'd feel him sigh.
Number 7, Jimmy Stewart's poem leaves Carson speechless. Jimmy Stewart was always a welcome guest on The Tonight Show during Carson's long run. Their conversations carried a gentle warmth with Stewart's slow, thoughtful delivery, serving as a calm counterbalance to Carson's polished style in 1981. Stewart came on the show and mentioned that he had written a poem about his dog, Bo, who had recently passed away. Carson asked him to share it, probably expecting something light-hearted and sweet. What happened instead turned into one of the most heartfelt moments ever seen on the show. Stewart began reading Bo a poem that opened simply but slowly, revealed layers of love, loyalty, and grief. He read lines about the quiet presence of his dog and the ache of loss when he reached the verse about feeling his dog's stare at night and reaching out only to find nothing there. The studio fell into complete silence, ending with the line, "I will always love a dog named Bo." When Stewart finished, the camera turned to Carson and captured something the audience rarely saw: genuine tears in the eyes of the most composed man on television. Carson was clearly touched, and for a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Johnny was really moved, recalled a director in the control room. It was not a staged bit or a host pretending for the cameras. It was just Johnny reacting honestly to Stewart's words. The power of the moment came from how unexpected it was, in a space usually filled with jokes and casual chatter. Stewart had brought pure sincerity, and Carson let it land with full honesty without trying to cover it with humor or rush to commercial, a producer. Later said, Johnny gave it the respect it deserved, and that told the audience it was okay to feel it too. That was rare in late-night television, which usually leaned on wit and clever remarks. The segment has lived on as one of the most memorable moments of Carson's entire 30-year run, remembered not for comedy or gossip, but for its simple human truth about love and loss, shared between two American icons with an authenticity that viewers never forgot.
She weighs about, she weighs...
Number 6. Snake escapes during Joan Embry's segment. Joan Embry from the San Diego Zoo was a regular visitor on The Tonight Show, bringing with her many exotic animals for Johnny Carson to interact with, sometimes with excitement and sometimes with hesitation. These animal moments were always unpredictable. But one appearance in the late 1970s gave viewers a spontaneous comedy gem that became a lasting part of Carson history. Embry arrived with several creatures that day, including a very large Burmese python. As she explained details about the snake, it suddenly grew more restless than expected, and without warning, it slithered off the desk and began moving toward Carson. His reaction was instant and completely genuine. He jumped out of his chair with surprising speed, backing away from the snake with visible fear, which immediately sent the audience into laughter. Johnny was not pretending, said a floor director who watched it happen. He had always been uneasy with some of the scarier animals, though he would usually play along, but when that python moved, he could not hide his real fear. It was pure fight or flight seen live on television. Once Embry and her assistants got the snake back under control, Johnny returned to his chair, fixed his tie, and gave the perfect line, "Somebody better check my pants." What made the moment so memorable was how it stripped away Carson's usual smooth image, showing the real human reaction that most viewers would have shared. His greatest strength was being relatable, explained a longtime producer. In that moment, he was not the untouchable king of late night. He was simply a man who wanted no part of a giant snake crawling near him. The audience loved these moments, when the polished host disappeared and the genuine Johnny came through. The python clip went on to be one of the most requested of all the animal segments, proving again that Carson's willingness to put himself in uncomfortable situations often produced the most unforgettable television moments.
I was a little bit late, and I'm sorry if I upset anybody here. I had an unusual incident in traffic. I either ran over a sheep or I ran over a small man wearing a sheepskin coat.
Number 5. George Carlin sneaks in. Censorship jab. George Carlin built much of his later career around challenging social rules and pushing limits on what could be said on television, most famously with his 7 words, "You can never say on television" routine. His visits to The Tonight Show always required a careful balance, letting Carlin be himself while still respecting network restrictions. During a 1983 appearance, he delivered what seemed like a harmless set of everyday observations, but hidden within it was a sly jab at television censorship. A clever play on words that somehow slipped past NBC's standards department, though the sharper members of the audience and Johnny Carson himself picked it up right away. Johnny definitely understood what George was doing, said a writer on the show at the time. You could see it in his face, the little smile and the quick glance at the camera. It was like he was telling viewers, "Yes, I caught that too, and am going to let it pass." The magic of that moment was in Carson's silence, Rather than shifting the subject or distancing himself from Carlin, he let the joke breathe and showed quiet respect for the comedians. With Johnny had his own struggles with network control over the years, explained a longtime producer. While he was never the kind of boundary pusher, Carlin was. He respected performers who found clever ways to say what they wanted, even with limits. NBC executives, however, were not amused. According to staff, the network got several complaints afterward, asking how it made it to air. Johnny defended Carlin privately. The producer said he basically told the network, if you didn't even notice it until after the broadcast, then George deserved to slip it through. Carson valued cleverness above nearly everything else for the audience. It became a rare moment of television, turning the mirror on itself. A shared wink between Carson and the sharpest viewers. A joke that existed precisely because of the same censorship it was mocking.
You're gonna start already, huh?
No, I'm not starting.
How are you?
I'm almost through.
Good to see you.
How'd all these people get in your room?
Number 4. Dean Martin appears drunk and kills. Dean Martin had built his entire image around being the smooth, charming entertainer who always looked like he had been drinking just enough to make things fun. He could throw out perfect jokes while seeming halfway to tipsy, and that character made him one of the most loved stars of his time, and a regular guest on The Tonight Show during a visit in the 1970s. Dean leaned extra hard into that drunk act, slurring words, missing his chair when trying to sit down, and landing punchlines with the over-careful style of someone trying to look sober. Dean was turning it up more than usual. That night recalled a director who worked on the show, and the crowd loved it. They believed they were watching the real Dean Martin, the wild party guy who might have had a few drinks before stepping on stage. What made the night even better was how Carson handled it. Instead of pulling Dean back or moving the talk somewhere safer, Johnny played the straight man, giving him setups that let the apparently drunk star drop bigger and funnier lines. Johnny knew the game, said a producer who worked with both of them. Dean's drunk act was just that, an act, or at least blown up from the truth. But Johnny understood that people loved it, so he let Dean run with it. The best moment came when Dean tried to tell a golf story, forgot what he was saying halfway, looked around blank for a second, then shrugged and said, who cares? It wasn't funny anyway, and the audience lost it. The genius of Dean was that no one could ever fully tell what was real and what was performance. Said the producer, Johnny valued that tension. It gave the whole room an edge because the audience felt like anything could happen. Even though some critics worried that it seemed like the show was making light of drinking on national television, the appearance is still remembered as a top example of two great entertainers using each other's strengths. Dean's crafted drunk act finding the perfect match in Carson's easy willingness to go along.
John.
Don, how
Are you the governor of Guam?
Aren't you getting a little older?
I know your age. The prom's over.
All right.
Number 3, Johnny crashes his own monologue. One of the most reliable parts of The Tonight Show was the way it always followed its pattern. Carson's opening monologue was a staple of television, done with steady timing for 30 years. This made it even more shocking when in the early 1980s that pattern was broken in the wildest way. Johnny had just started telling his jokes when Don Rickles, who was supposed to appear later, suddenly started heckling him from behind the curtain. At first, the crowd was puzzled. Then, they realized who it was, as Rickles' famous voice grew louder. Johnny lost his rhythm and stopped mid-joke. Instead of pushing forward, he did something no one expected. He dropped. His act turned to the curtain and shouted, "Don, get out here!" That was not in the plan. said a stage manager who was there. Rickles was supposed to wait quietly. Like every other guest, Johnny stopping his monologue. Like that was unheard of. Rickles walked out, pretending to be innocent, but clearly thrilled about wrecking the flow of the show. Carson, far from upset, played along and brought him to the chair. A whole segment earlier. Johnny loved Don because he was the one person who could never be predicted. Said a producer who worked with them both. The show always had to run on tight timing and structure, but Rickles showed that anything could happen at any second, and Johnny liked that energy more than he feared it. What made this moment so powerful was how it showed Carson's willingness to throw away his own routine if something more fun appeared in front of him. Instead of sticking to the written jokes, he chose the surprise because he knew it was better television that was Johnny at his strongest. The producer said he knew the best TV could come from breaking rules, not following them. Few hosts had the courage to toss out prepared material when the moment demanded it. This became one of the legendary Carson-Rickles bits, showing how real their friendship was, and how both men got the best out of each other because neither one could ever be fully predicted when they were on stage together.
The attitude entirely changes, and the
In other
whole
words,
situation.
the whole thing is kind of done right like, you know.
No, you're right. You think about it a while.
Number 2. Sammy Davis Jr. Rapid Fire Impression Blitz. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most talented entertainers in all of show business. A singer, a dancer, an actor, and a comedian whose wide range made him a regular and much-loved guest on The Tonight Show during Carson's years in charge during one unforgettable visit in the 1970s. What started as a casual chat about other stars suddenly turned into an incredible display of Sammy's skill when he began firing off a chain of impressions that left Johnny and the crowd amazed. In less than a minute, he became Frank Sinatra, Jerry Lewis, and Jimmy Stewart, nailing not only their voices, but also their unique looks and movements. With stunning accuracy, Johnny was holding his stomach from laughing, said a camera operator who was there. It was not the polite laugh he sometimes gave to weaker moments. This was true, uncontrollable laughter. He was enjoying it as much as anyone in the crowd. The special part was how unplanned it felt. Unlike guests who arrived with material prepared, this act flowed straight from the talk, proving how Sammy could pull from his huge store of voices and gestures instantly. Sammy never needed to practice. He lived. These people said a producer who helped with several of his visits. He had spent years working with them, performing beside them, and spending time with them. What the crowd saw as a magic trick was simply natural for him. Carson's reaction showed his deep respect for Sammy's gift as a performer himself. Johnny knew exactly how hard it was to capture another star so perfectly and to change into someone else, without a pause. Johnny once told me, Sammy was the most complete entertainer he had ever met, said a writer close to Carson. He said, if you had to pick one person to watch for the rest of your life, Sammy was the smart choice, because he could turn into many different entertainers at will. The Impression Blitz has stayed one of the most talked about examples of Sammy's incredible range, a short but shining show of why he was seen as one of the greatest all-around stars in the history of entertainment.
October 26th, would you welcome Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Number 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks only in German by the middle of the 1980s. Arnold Schwarzenegger had made the move from bodybuilding champion to Hollywood action hero, appearing on The Tonight Show to promote his newest movie. While these visits normally followed a simple routine, Arnold chose to add some surprise comedy. When Johnny asked the first question, Arnold replied with a long answer, fully in German, his own language, but one that neither Johnny nor most of the audience could follow. As Arnold kept talking seriously in German, Johnny truly looked confused. A producer who was there said Johnny had no idea this was going to happen. He looked at us in the control room as if to say, "What is going on right now?" But instead of losing control, he leaned right into the silliness. Johnny never wasted a chance for comedy. He started acting as if he understood every word, nodding his head with care, and even throwing in fake German, like sounds of his own. The crowd soon understood the trick and burst out laughing at the silly back and forth. After a few minutes, Arnold finally broke. Character laughed and switched to English, saying he had always wanted to see how Johnny would react to something like that. What made it so funny was Johnny's choice to play along instead of stopping. The bit said a director who worked on the show, some other hosts would have been upset at being made to look foolish, but Johnny saw the comedy right away and became part of it. The segment showed both Arnold's hidden comic talent and Johnny's amazing gift for finding humor in what could have been an awkward situation. Instead of holding tight to control as the host, Johnny let it go and became a partner in Arnold's playful prank. Johnny always said the best parts of the show were the ones you could never plan. Remembered a close friend of his, this was exactly one of those moments, something that happened only because a guest went off script, and Johnny trusted himself enough to follow wherever it went.